I'll be honest, error handling in JavaScript kind of sucks. I know, hot take, but that's what we're here for, right? Seriously though, try catch it's a disaster. There's a lot of subtlety for the things that are wrong with it, but there's one particular piece that I don't think it's talked about enough, and I saw a tweet that inspired me to make this video. The piece that we're talking about here is the scoping. Huge shout out to Leah for taking this unpopular stance that I am going to go out of my way to make popular, because JavaScript should work the way that they're describing. So what is Leah describing here? Try blocks should have been designed not to behave like a regular block with respect to block scoping variables. It's rarely if ever useful since the scoping is not conceptually meaningful. Effectively, it's more of a code annotation than a control flow. Unlike control flow blocks, there is no program state that only makes sense within a try block. The catch block, on the other hand, is actual control flow, and scoping makes complete sense there. So what are they talking about? What's control flow? What's going on here? We're going to have to open up a sandbox and play. So here we have a basic node template. Let's do a function, do some work. In this function, we're going to do things. Let's say one of those things might error. We'll say function get number. We'll do const number equals, I'll do num, so it's not the weird type, equals math.random times 100. And if num is greater than 50, we'll throw a new error, number too big. Otherwise, we will return num. Cool. So this function will return a number, but it also might throw an error. So now we want to use this for something. Let's say random number doubler. So this function generates a random number and then it doubles it. So we need that number first. So const num equals get number. So we'll say const double equals num times 2, and then we'll return double. We'll say const doubled equals random number doubler, and we will console.log doubled. Cool. Pretty basic. Let's run it. Node watch index.js. Oh, the first time we got error, number is too big. We should probably handle that. So let's handle it. We'll do a try block. Since this is safe, we won't put that in there. And we're going to catch e console.error e, and then we'll return -1. Just easier to rerun index.js. Node watch index.js, 3 times the charm. Cool. So here we still get the error number is too big, and it returns -1 now instead. But what if it worked? Let's change the condition here to be if number is greater than 100, we'll throw. Now we're getting a different error. Number is not defined. This is the problem. Since this is defined inside of the try block, num doesn't exist outside of this block. The only way for this code to work is to move this in here, which is dumb, or to have let num equal -1, and then we try to set it in here instead. These are the only solutions that actually work, because when you define a try, the things inside of here are scoped into this block. So if you define a variable in here, if you do any new instantiations inside of the try block, they don't exist externally. Does just doing let num in here work? Nope. It does not. Nice try. Do you know what does work? Var. Because var hoists. It's so dumb. It's so dumb. So what's going on here? When you define something in a block like this in JavaScript, it doesn't exist outside of the block, unless you use var, which allows you to hoist the value out. This is awful. This is terrible. The reason this exists is if you had an if statement. Like let's say we have function double if odd. And this function takes in, it won't even take in the number. We'll just grab the number still like this. Or you know what, we'll take in a number. We'll say num comes in here. If num mod 2 does not equal 0, then we can even define it in here. Const doubled equals num times 2. Return doubled. Obviously, you just return directly there. Otherwise, we return num. If we were to try and access doubled outside of here, even if we don't do that, console.log doubled, we can't do that because this doubled exists in this scope, not in this scope. If I was to call this below, doubled if odd 4, we'll get an error, as we should, because this doubled variable doesn't exist out here. If I var it, it works because that will hoist it, which is a terrible behavior. But there's a reason that we do it this way. It's because this code might not get hit. There's a possibility, half the time in this case, that doubled will not be hit because this condition isn't necessarily true. And that's why we have blocked scoping inside of JavaScript. Because if you have a condition that might not be hit, any values that you define in here now are things that might not exist. Because if we pass this an even number, double doesn't exist, so obviously we can't log it. So here that makes sense. Where it makes a lot less sense is in a try block, because this try block always gets hit. No matter what we do, you will hit try. So why does this block get destroyed? Why don't we get to keep whatever variables and values happened in here? The only case I can think of that would make any sense for this behavior is if we're defining multiple things in here and an error could happen somewhere else. Well, let's just throw here. Throw new error, forcing var to never get hit. I could abstract this so it's a little sillier, like function log something. And let's say we have this log function that's just broken, and we trigger this here. This seems like it'll be fine, and we are catching an error here. But if we were catching this error and we weren't returning, this is when the problems start. Even if we set var num to just be 1, since this error happened before we hit this part in the scope, that value can't exist. Interesting that they have the error here is forcing var to never get hit. So it's smart enough to know that this should be hittable. And in this particular case, it's not, because I'm forcing an error before the variable is defined. But that's the only reason that try catch could ever reasonably be thought to keep things in its own block. Because theoretically, if in the catch, you don't escape. Because if in the catch I return, there is now no world in which we don't get to this code. But if we don't return here and we try to keep going through the code, but an error occurred before the variable is defined, then you can theoretically get into a situation where you're trying to interface with a variable that doesn't exist because you caught an error that occurred before the variable was defined. That's the only reason that try catch should have scoping in the try, because it is conditional, not in the sense that the whole thing conditionally runs, but any given line inside of the try catch might not be hit because an error happened earlier in that binding. So the more I'm thinking about it, I'm beginning to understand why it works this way, but it still sucks. Ideally, it wouldn't do that. And we would have TypeScript be smart enough that if we return in the catch, it knows the values exist. And if we don't return in the catch, then it assumes undefined could be the value for any given one of those variables. The try block contains statements that are conditionally executed, with that condition being if an error was raised. Sounds like control flow to me. This is true even for code not wrapped in a try block. You just don't get anything else executed after in that case. Yes, I am beginning to change my mind on this. I even tweeted here that I wanted this to be a popular opinion, and I still do. But the fact that something occurring within the control flow might break that way is a real edge case that I hadn't been considerate of enough until I started writing the code and demoing it for this video. Crazy how educating people on a topic makes you more informed on that topic. The difference if this is, so to follow up with what Leah said here is if the code is not wrapped in a try block, you just don't get anything else executed after in that case. But you do if you catch it. So that's the difference. If I was to just delete all of the try catch stuff here, this throws before any of the other code executes. So it might say the like var is never getting hit, whatever. We're going to constant instead. And now the error we're getting, oh no, that's the error that I named there. Never mind. Forgot that. I had named that. Cool. I was going insane for a second. We're going to change that to don't forget to subscribe. By the way, half my viewers haven't subscribed. Feel free to hit that button. Costs you nothing. Anyways, now we're getting the error, don't forget to subscribe. Much more useful. The point I'm trying to make here is that because we're throwing this error, none of this code gets executed. But if I was to change this to var and bring back the try block, even if I suppress that, we now get an unexpected nan, because the try catch kept this value from being defined. And now we're trying to interface with this value that doesn't exist. And when we multiply a value that doesn't exist by 2, the result's nan. So while I understand where Leah's coming from here, that if code isn't wrapped in a try block, the scoping problem still exists, except doesn't. Because if you don't have the try catch block, it's impossible for this code underneath to execute. If you were to think of the try block less like one block and more like each line is an if statement, it makes more sense that it's scoped the way it is, because it means you have to assume afterwards that the values don't exist. Yeah, I'm changing my tone on this. I'm coming around. I might change my mind on this. I hate the DX of it regardless, but the fact that you can have an error occur before a variable is defined, and if you don't return in catch, it's possible to try and access that value and do something wrong and broken, that would suck. Okay. Yeah, I've changed my mind. Hopefully you watch to the end of the video so you can see why my mind on this has changed, because as much as I agree, my mind is changing. Ethan Neisser had an interesting point I wanted to talk about because he said I should. If you don't already know him, he's the guy that made Effect TS popular. Zig has a similar concept here where you can, on a given call, write a catch case there, and then you can assume afterwards that that thing exists. There's also a try keyword, which is cool, where we try file.write all, and now if there's an issue, we will return error file not found, and shows you where that came from, because we're trying to write to a file that does not exist foo.txt. We defer the close, which means that after the function runs, we close the file writer, and we try to write. Since we put try here, we can get the error for accessing that. Makes sense. Yeah, I do like how Zig is doing this. There's definitely stuff to learn from here, but it is important to understand that if we're defining things inside of a try block in JavaScript, it's possible that any line isn't accessed. This is the first time in a while that I'm just coming out with a different opinion than I had at the start, but I no longer agree. That hurts. And somehow, despite all of that, my conclusion is, as always, JavaScript sucks. I did not think by the end of this I would end up disagreeing and still somehow hate JavaScript more, but that's the nature of this terrible language we work with. Until next time, peace nerds.